welcome to the Pig and Whistle Tales from Azeroth. As always here at the Pig and Whistle Inn in Stormwind, I go through a variety of subjects with regards to World of Warcraft. So grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy. This midweek episode we're going to be going over Rate the Dungeon, or Dungeons, as I should say. And we'll be looking at the two in the Caverns of Time, the very first two dungeons that appeared in the Caverns of Time in Morass. And they are Old Hillsbrad, Foothills, and Black Morass. These two dungeons aren't necessarily the most enjoyed dungeons, we will say that. One of them is a simple Violet Hold type experience where mobs come out of portals and you just have to defeat them. It's kind of a wave, so next portal, you're not really running far. And the other one is very much you're going through a story scenario, which is very unique. I do have to give it that. We will start off with Old Hillsbrad Foothills. The the layout of the dungeon was very weird. It's something that was never really done before, but essentially it was an entire zone. It was the entire zone of Hillsbrad Foothills. Now, within this zone, there is actually a lot of hidden Easter eggs. In South Shore, if you go off the path and don't actually go and do the dungeon itself, where all the mobs are located, which is Durnhold Keep, you can find a lot of things happening around South Shore. You can find all of the bosses to Scarlet Monastery. You can find the Ashbringer, the literal Ashbringer, the guy who named him, or was named after it. You can find the crystal that is within Ashbringer when it is purified. You can find loads of huge NPC names in there, such as Alexandros Mograine, Tyrion. You can find Benedictus. Fairbanks. There's another one, Abendis, even, I'm pretty sure as well. You can find loads of different names, and it is crawling with Easter eggs, this dungeon. But essentially, you have an entire zone to explore. When you get to the boundaries of the zone, it just goes grey. You don't see much. That's kind of it. You eventually get to a point where you hit a invisible wall, but it just goes grey whenever you try and leave the zone, essentially. The gear in there is very meh for what it is. It's a very middle of the road dungeon. So the heroic version, you don't get much. I think you get probably some wrists or a belt in there from the final boss on heroic, but that's about it. It's not worth doing the dungeon over. The memories that I have of this dungeon, doing it on heroic, is when I first did it with a paladin tank. The very first boss did a mortal strike and it one-shot our tank. That is the very first memory I have of this dungeon. It's interesting, to say the least. But yeah, it's not worth the gear, essentially. It didn't get a revamp as, all TBC dungeons, so I would have to give it, honestly, 6 out of 10. The more I remember this dungeon, the more it grows on me, because of it's more just lore dependent, and the amount of Easter eggs that are in it makes it very cool. But in terms of an actual dungeon structure, it's not enjoyable. It's mainly there just so that you could do the Karazhan attunement. That was kind of it, really. That was the whole purpose of it, to do an attunement for a raid. Other than that, you wouldn't really go into this dungeon for anything. You wouldn't go in there for the loot. You wouldn't go in there for the XP. You would do it to get the attunement. And it was always a dungeon that I always was frowned upon, or thought was frowned upon, or didn't like. But getting the dungeon being older and older, and my understanding of WoW more and more, actually makes me realise how cool this dungeon is. Purely from a lore-specific point of view. Which, does actually bump it up. That's probably what 5 out of the 10 of the rating is. The actual, Easter eggs and the lore behind it. So, it is what it is. Black Morass is the second one. And this one, you had to do Old Hillsbrad to actually enter in the first place. So what Black Morass is it's a swamp. It is Swamp of Sorrows. Actually, no, it's Blasted Lands before it came Blasted Lands. And essentially, it's when Medivh heralds in the orcs for their invasion, for the very first invasion, and that's what led to Orcs versus Humans Warcraft 1. So you have to defend Medivh while he is opening the portal from the Infinite Dragonflight, and essentially it is a wave-style boss. You just kind of kill the mobs that come out of the portals. It's very uninteresting and very uninteractive, but it's a very simple system. It's nothing crazy at the zone as well. It's a very simple thing to get around. But the loot was actually very good. It was one of the later dungeons, and the last boss certainly dropped some very good loot. A couple swords, there was neck pieces, there was trinkets that were good in there. It was actually a very decent dungeon, and it was used for alchemists if you were looking to get a flask specialization, that kind of thing. It was used in a lot of different things, but that's kind of the only reason people went to it. No one really liked the design of it. So there was no revamp, as always. I would have to only give it a 6 out of 10 as well. And this is purely because there was actually content to do with it. That's the thing. If there wasn't any content to do with it, this would have been a shambles of a dungeon, in my opinion. And not many people would have come back to experience it, because not many people enjoy the Violet Hold type of dungeons where it is just wave after wave from portals, essentially. But that is it for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening. As always, check out the Patreon as well as Twitch. Constant stuff happening over there. We will be streaming today when this episode goes live at 7 BST. So make sure you catch that. Make sure you hop on and catch that for everyone. But thank you all once again, and go with Valor, friend. Goodbye all.